So in the aftermath of Alexander's empire crumbling, Rome was the next great superpower to rise in the ancient world. Rome enjoyed a much more hospitable homeland than the Greeks, with a long growing season, fertile soil, vast forests, and more iron deposits. These advantages are how Rome surpassed the Greeks in cultural and political development. So it was hard for Greece to advance beyond city-states because the Greek homeland has little farmland, little natural resources, and they're so geographically divided between each individual valley. The Roman Republic had two social classes, the wealthy patricians and the plebeians, a class of laborers and owners of small farms. In the early Republic, the patrician class maintained power by controlling the main branches of government, the Senate, the assemblies, and the elected consuls. So the Senate and the assemblies is like our House of Representatives and our Senate in the United States. The elected consuls are sort of like a president, but they only serve for 1-year terms, and there's 2 of them. Plebeians could vote in the assemblies, but their votes counted less than the patricians. This is the first form of government that starts to seriously resemble how the United States is set up. I mentioned with ancient Athens how the Athenian democracy isn't really democracy like you think of today. The idea of a republic from Rome is much more aligned to the type of government our founding fathers envisioned. Remember, republic is where you vote for representatives who vote for you. The word republic comes from the Latin word res publica, which literally translates to the public thing. Over time, discontent and rebellion among the plebeians forced reforms, but never gained equal governing power. This form of government proved highly effective. At the time, the Romans would write about how their government is a mixture of various types of government. They would claim to be part oligarchy, part democracy. Now, by 290 BCE, Rome expanded and controlled the entire Italian peninsula. 264 to 202, Rome fights a series of wars known as the Punic Wars with Carthage. Carthage was a former colony of Phoenicia that grew into its own empire. Rome would win the war, though Carthage did levy some devastating blows to Rome. For example, the military general Hannibal marched elephants into the Italian peninsula, terrorizing the countryside. Historians argue exactly how he got the elephants to cross the Alps. As a result of the Punic War, many small landowners became poor, had to sell their land. Many large landowners became more wealthy. Also, there became a problem where every time you had a prominent soldier retire, they were expected to be given land by their general. And over time, just with Rome conquering so many places and having so many good generals, they simply started running out of land to give. It is funny how effective war elephants were against a civilization that didn't know how to fight elephants, because we know now that they're really just giant scaredy cats. But if you never saw an elephant before and you saw one in battle, I'm sure it was horrifying. Now, let's get into some politics of how the Roman Republic transitioned into the Roman Empire. Julius Caesar took advantage of instability after the Punic Wars. Caesar undermined the Roman government by accumulating power for himself. In 60 BCE, Caesar unified with 2 other powerful men in Rome to create the first triumvirate. These 3 men dominated the government of the Republic for a decade. During this time, Caesar conquered Gaul, or modern-day France, for Rome. The events that took place in Gaul could be described as genocide by our modern definition. Seriously, well over half the population was slaughtered by these Roman legions. Now, his success worried members of the Roman Senate because Caesar became very, very popular after he conquered Gaul. The idea behind the Republic was not for 3 wealthy men to be able to control the entire apparatus of government. This was the beginning of the end for the Republic. There was a procedure in Rome where during a crisis, like a time of war, a dictator could be declared. That word did not mean then what it means today. A dictator was a temporary, absolute leader who would govern through a crisis. He would only be given power to govern for a certain period of time. That way you wouldn't have to call everybody to meet to make a decision very quickly. That was the original term for dictator. Also, the term imperator means very successful general. In turn, Caesar's title of imperator will become emperor. Caesar's soldiers were deeply loyal, and he was popular among the common people in the Roman heartland. In an attempt to control Caesar, the Senate ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome. That was not unheard of, but it was unusual because they wanted to strip power away from Caesar because they saw him as a general who was becoming too powerful. The Roman legions weren't allowed to operate in military formations in Italy. So once they got near Rome, they weren't allowed to just march around like it was wartime. Once Caesar crossed the Rubicon River going towards Rome, that's whenever the Senate realized that he meant to take Rome by force. So the old saying, crossing the Rubicon, comes from whenever Caesar made his last decision where he couldn't go back any further. He had to attack Rome because he had crossed the Rubicon. So in 44 BCE, Caesar defeats his political rivals and pressures the Roman Senate to name him dictator. Remember, he took his entire legion with him. So under duress, he was declared dictator for life, which was a brand new thing. Before, dictators were only given a certain period of time to manage a crisis. In essence, Caesar just became the absolute ruler. You still had a Senate and everything, but he effectively dissolved the Roman Republic just like that. This freaked out the Senate. In March of 44 BCE, the Senate called Caesar for a meeting, and he was stabbed dozens of times by multiple senators in a political assassination. Ironically, the conspirators believed this would save the Republic, but the events that led after would completely destroy the Republic and solidify the empire. If you ever had to watch William Shakespeare's play on Julius Caesar, at the climax of the play, whenever Brutus stabs Caesar from the middle of an English play, Caesar looks at Brutus and says, "Et tu, Brute?" You've done the entire play in English and you say that phrase in Latin. Makes no sense. Augustus Caesar was born as Octavian. He was the adopted son of Julius Caesar. With the help of two of his father's supporters, he seized Rome after Caesar's assassination. These other two men made up the Second Triumvirate and ruled for a decade, but like the First Triumvirate, it eventually collapsed with one man coming up on top. Octavian managed to force one member to retire and defeated the other two in a civil war. In 27 BCE, Octavian accepts the title Augustus, which means exalted one, and became Rome's first emperor. His rule marks the beginning of what we call the Pax Romana, or Roman peace in English. This was a 207-year period of political and economic and cultural dominance. In many ways, this is the peak of Europe all the way up until the modern time. Like after the Pax Romana, this region will not really recover until the 1800s. By the way, Caesar is a family name. It was actually pronounced Kaiser at the time, but I just feel weird saying Julius Caesar, which is like how his name was actually said in Latin. This sounds weird, doesn't it? Just to recap, whenever Caesar is murdered, his adopted son Octavian rules with two other guys as the Second Triumvirate. Eventually, he becomes the emperor and is named Exalted One. After Caesar's death, the Senate survived only to give advice to the emperors. Citizen participation in government was only allowed at the local level. Plebeians lost a lot of influence they had. The empire was administered by an extensive bureaucracy, which worked through a series of cities linked by these amazing paved roads. There's an old saying, all roads lead to Rome. These roads were way ahead of their time. They would dig 2 or 3 feet down and fill it with a layer of gravel, then a layer of sand, before they put the cobblestone on top. They really were nice roads for the time period. The weird thing is, though, they didn't know how to make curves. All the roads were straight. Instead of having a curve in the road, it would stop and make a right angle. Modern day Iraq, modern day Egypt, modern day Azerbaijan, parts of modern day Russia, parts of modern day England, modern day Portugal, parts of modern day Morocco, all in the same country, all ruled by the same man. It's remarkable how large this empire was. You're doing pretty well if the Mediterranean Sea or your local pond. And they truly controlled all this territory. It wasn't those systems where they were just paid tribute. Their laws were enforced and carried out across the entire empire. 235 CE, the stability of the Roman Empire comes to an end, and the empire enters a period that we call the 3rd century crisis. So before its actual fall, Rome went into a period of decline after the Pax Romana. Rome suffered from a series of weak and short-lived emperors, invasions, economic depression, and social unrest. This led to the Emperor Diocletian to divide the empire into 4 parts, essentially dividing it in half for the long term. In 476, the western half of the empire succumbs to invasion by the Germanic tribes. After this, there still is a Roman Empire out of Constantinople, but we call this the Byzantine Empire. But the Byzantines still called themselves the Roman Empire. It just wasn't based out of Rome. So by 476 CE, the western half of the empire is finally brought down by Germanic tribes. Remember though, before 476, the city itself of Rome was invaded and sacked by Germanic tribes more than once. So there was a slow burn that led to 476. It wasn't like one day they woke up and the empire was just over. It was a slow walk from the end of the Pax Romana to the eventual fall of the empire. So here's how Rome was divided by Diocletian. It was divided into 4 pieces. Essentially though, it made 2 pieces where you have the Eastern Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire. Once Rome falls, all this western part will dissolve and the Eastern Roman Empire still exists. Like I said, they called themselves the Roman Empire, but we call them the Byzantine Empire today to distinguish between the two. The foundation of the European Renaissance and the scientific revolution developed in ancient Greece and Rome. Greek and Roman engineers developed techniques to construct monumental architecture, irrigation, municipal water systems, and roads. Greco-Roman contribution to science and engineering also diffused to the Arab world, where all this knowledge was held during the Dark Ages, when a lot of the Christian world was trying to destroy any information that was pre-Christian. Early Greek and Roman culture established the political and cultural foundation for the Western world. Athens and early Rome used representative styles of government that would not be used again until Europe during the Enlightenment, like more recently in our timeline. It truly is remarkable some of the ideas that the Greek and Roman world had. Now remember, they were not perfect, not by any stretch of the imagination. The way they treated women was awful, and usually these leaders were very corrupt and didn't embody the democratic style that they talked about, but it's important because it's the first time that humans tried it out. You go to the Enlightenment, the 17 and 1800s, and people are trying the same ideas. And whenever they talk about inspiration, they're talking about this time period over 2,000 years ago, whenever they believe that these ideas were first used. No matter how you chop it, it's important.